Hi, this is Roger Smith of the True Blue Lounge, and today I have the pleasure of speaking to Marlene Smith on Ask an Expert Aviation Series. Marlene's been flying for over 40 years, so guess what? Nobody to ask about flying but Marlene as far as I'm concerned. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Marlene, but first remember, like, subscribe, send to a friend, make a comment. Here is Marlene. Respect. Later. All right, Marlene, thanks for coming on the show. This is a new format I've got going, Ask an Expert. This Ask the Expert, in this case, it's going to be you. And this series is going to be about aviation. When I think of aviation, I think of Marlene. So, Marlene, rather than people wondering what your experience is, can you just tell everyone what your experience in aviation has been about? How did you start and what have you been doing and how long you've been doing it, please? So everyone knows I'm not talking to a Kwashi Badu, I'm talking to a bona fide pilot.
Okay. Well, thank you, Roger. Thank you for inviting me on this expert. Thank you for thinking of me as such. But I've been flying for 42 years, so perhaps I do fall in that expert category. I started when I was 18 years old from Wings, Jamaica. We hail from our beloved Manning School, and all through my childhood years, this was exactly what I wanted to do. Um, the first time I saw an airplane, it was really a little rocket. It was a rocket on the compound prep school, which is where I attended when I was 4 years old, and I thought that yeah, I'm going to be an astronaut. I'm going to. Well, as time progressed, and my dad was in World War II, and he wanted to be a pilot himself. And so all my younger childhood days growing up, I was listening to my dad's war stories. And he never got the opportunity to become a pilot. Um, so I decided, well, you know what? I would like to be a pilot. And his first reaction was, well, women don't fly. And I'm like, but indeed they do. And I knew of at least one pilot, Maria Zedi Haddad. She was the first female pilot with Air Jamaica. And I actually reached out to her. And the rest is history. I mean, in fact, the story continues where my sister, my oldest sister, she did not go to Manning's. She went to a school in Kingston, Ardennes, and my parents used to drive to the from Kingston every month, and to see her and make sure that she had all the necessities. But the neighbor was a pilot, the infamous Michael Batts. He was a pilot, and he's retired now. Um, and so, as a child growing up, wanting to be a pilot and actually talking to one, I'm like, this is awesome. So, um, the long story short is that Michael worked at Wings Jamaica at the time. He was prior Air Jamaica, but he worked at Wings, and he sent me the application. I was so elated when I got it, and I joined Wings Jamaica when I was 18 as a student pilot. In 3 years there, I had to work in Kingston because now I'm relocating from the country to the Kingston, getting acquainted with moving around Kingston and flying and working and trying to, you know, be self-sufficient. Because in those days it was very expensive. It's still more expensive these days. But I spent 3 years there, and I was working a job, so it was really, really very intense. Um, I had to work during the day, do ground school at night, and flying on the weekends. So it was 7 days a week for 3 years. At the end of the 3 years, with 200 hours, I spoke to Mr. Barnett, the boss, and I said, "Well, what does one do with 200 hours of flying time?" He said, "You become an instructor." So I'm like, "I don't know what to teach." He says, "Well, we have that course." So I said, "Okay, let me learn how to teach somebody to fly."
Right.
So I was 20 at the time, and I actually fell in love with instructing, and that has been my forte. I just absolutely love teaching.
Okay.
So they were charter pilots and flying across like to Cuba and Haiti and neighboring islands. So I got some experience with overwater flying and multi-engine flying, night flying, that sort of thing. And when I got to 2,000 hours total time, fully qualified, I applied to Air Jamaica. And initially, when I applied to them in 1989, they thought I was too short. So they told me
I
that.
never knew there was a height restriction.
Well, you know what? When Maria was applying, they had female restrictions. They wanted male pilots,
Okay.
but that was in the 70s, that era. And of
Yeah.
course, well, nowadays, there's so many women pilots around, you know. So I actually joined Air Jamaica in 1989, along with three other female pilots. So my experience started on the A300 as what they call a second officer, which is a flight engineer in those days. Nowadays, we have modern technology, which is just two pilots. So we have a captain and a co-pilot. So I joined as the third pilot in the cockpit, in charge of all the systems of the aircraft. Then later on, with experience, I was able to become a first officer, upgraded to first officer on the A300. Then we got rid of those. They were kind of antique airplanes. So we started to get more modern airplanes with Air Jamaica. And they brought in the A310s. So I was a first officer on the A310. And that opened up more avenues where we could do overwater flying towards London, ETOPS and MMPS and all of those things, aviation related. I spent 6 months on that, and then I decided to transition to a smaller aircraft just to get variety. So I became a first officer on the MD-83. But I had a reason to go on the MD-83. The course was being done in Atlanta with Delta Airlines. And at the time, I had a US single engine ATP, and I wanted to obtain my multi engine ATP. And ATP is the Airline Transport Pilot's License. And so the course was going to be done by the FAA in Atlanta. So I'm like, hey, this is the opportunity. So not only did I get a multi-engine endorsement on my single engine ATP, I also got a DC-9 type rating because
Okay.
of the equipment that I was flying. So in 2002, I transitioned from right seat MD-83 to left seat 320. So I got my command in 2002
When you
on the.
say left and right seat, I'm thinking left hand drive, right hand drive, and I'm thinking in the air, does it matter? So help me out.
Well,
This is why I'm
yes,
asking an
because
expert.
sure, it does matter because in the left seat of an aircraft is the captain, and the captain is responsible for the entire aircraft. The crew members, everything that goes on in that airplane, it falls on the shoulders of a captain, right? So the first officer is sometimes called reference as a co-captain because if something were to happen to the captain, then the co-pilot or co-captain would be the one to actually bring the aircraft home safely, right? So we train pilots to be captains. And so as an engineer, when I just started, I spent like 7 years as an engineer and then actually flew the aircraft as a first officer. Because as an engineer, you don't actually fly the aircraft. No, nowadays with modern airplanes, we don't even have three pilot crew members anymore.
You
It's
know
all
this. This
pilot.
goes to my question. So I'm going to tell you why I'm going to be honest with you. I'll tell you why I thought about you. So I watched this program where people dissect plane crashes,
Hmm.
and there was this young lady. She was a Instagram influencer and a pilot. So she had a
Hmm.
bit of money, and her dad were flying, and they both perished in a crash. So then I'm watching the YouTube I watch is about real pilots telling us what happened. And
Right.
apparently, this young lady had done so many hours flying, but didn't get her pilot's license, and she could never understand getting the trim right. Now, you know
Mm.
what the term trim means. We're
Yes.
going to tell them what
Yes.
trim means. She just
Yes.
couldn't be. She just couldn't get the trim right, and she would always be doing the opposite from the trim, and the plane was yo-yoing. But the funny
Mhm.
part about it is, she had a GoPro at the back, two GoPros at the front, and her Instagram page was it. But what she done was, it looks as though she gets in the plane, plays around with the trim, presses the button for autopilot, but it looks like nothing happened. So in
Right.
the time when she crashed, I'm just an engineer, so I can look at graphs. I'm looking at altitude. So she never once, it seemed at one point, tried to accelerate. The plane was just yo-yoing up and down. So as she climbed, it wanted to store. Then she turned it down and it started accelerating. But it was
Mhm.
just all natural. She wasn't doing anything. And I was thinking to
Right.
myself, wow, just because she's got some dollars, she came out of a slower plane, 180 horsepower, to some big 250 horsepower turbo plane. So whatever she was doing started exaggerating whatever
Yeah,
problems it was. So
of
that's why
course.
I wanted to talk to you. So my first
Yeah.
question for you,
Hmm.
first question is, most people think about a modern aircraft. They think, oh, with all this bloody technology, the planes flying for themselves. All them doing is, on a pressing a couple switches, and you press a button and lean back. What is that mistake that we, the public, don't know?
Boy, Roger, you would not believe how much goes into actually flying the aircraft. The preparation that needs to be done. So we have to get there earlier than the passengers, obviously, because there's a lot of preparation. I don't know if you have ever had the pleasure of being into a cockpit. I know recently one of my Manning's past students was on my flight and he came into the cockpit and he was
What's his
just,
name?
oh, Peter James.
Oh, I saw the
Peter,
picture. I think he took a picture,
yes,
yeah?
he did take a picture.
Sir Peter James.
He was like, "Oh my God, you know what all these switches do, all these buttons." Well, yes, we have to know. We are trained for it. And so there is so much that goes on when we get on board that aircraft. We have procedures. We have to prepare the cockpit. So we have to check every switch and make sure that they're in the correct position, because especially on like a first flight of the day, as that's a little bit different from just taking over from another crew, because certain switches are already in place, like the navigation switches, and the electrical, maybe the APU is running, external power might be hooked up or something. But when you come into the aircraft on a what we call a dead aircraft, not even the batteries are on. We have to check the battery voltage. We have to make sure that it's within its limit. If it's not, we have to put on the external power. We have to charge it for 20 minutes and we have to check it again, and then we have to go through all our checks. We get our paperwork and we liaison with dispatch. We have a dispatch section and they prepare our paperwork for us. But just like you're going on a road trip and you have your map all set out as to your route, we have to double check our route. We have to make sure that what the computer is going to fly is actually what we want to that direction that for it to go. So we have to match our paperwork with the computerized stuff that we have to program. So that takes up a little time, and we have to coordinate with maintenance if there are any issues in our logbook. We have to coordinate with making sure we have adequate fuel. Um, the fuelers are told how much fuel we need for the particular flight and aircraft parked at whatever gate. So sometimes you get on board, you double check, you're like, oh, we've been short maybe 1,000 pounds, 500 pounds, whatever it is. Or sometimes we're over fueled because perhaps that aircraft was going somewhere else and now they have given it to me to take it to my destination. And I'm like, okay, well, this is too much gas. We need to defuel, or perhaps it's insufficient fuel and we now need to call back the fuelers and get more gas. So there's a lot of stuff. I think the perspective of the public is that our life is just nice, glamorous, well paid, and we just come in the cockpit and we fly to our destination, go to a luxurious hotel and enjoy life and moving right along. But there's so much, it can be very, very stressful. We have to look at the weather, where we're leaving from, where we're going to, if we have an alternate, do we have enough fuel to do all of that? You know, what if, we have medical emergencies in flight, we have mechanical malfunctions in flight, we have so much going on. We have the
So
traffic out there,
you're,
it's
lead,
a lot
you're,
of
you're,
stuff.
lead, you're, lead- you're leading up to my second question. So,
Yeah.
what's the most challenging, scariest incident that you've had in the 40 years of flying? And are you allowed to tell us normal people?
Yeah, I can share my experiences with you. Absolutely. I've had actually, I would say, three really scary events. But I would say the scariest one, they kind of fall in the same category. One was very low fuel. The other one was flying in, dispatched into Hurricane Ivan in Atlanta. Um, so they dispatched me. This was in Air Jamaica days into Hurricane Ivan. I'm like, we don't dispatch into a hurricane. Come on, man. And they're like, oh well, the weather moves, and so we took off out of Montego Bay, heading to Atlanta. And what struck me initially was that we had tons of fuel. We had like 2 hours of whole fuel. I'm like, and I knew there was a hurricane going up there. Yeah, it's a category one, but the winds are gusting, low visibility, heavy thunderstorm rain, that sort of thing. So anyway, we get up there as we're approaching the boundary of the Miami airspace. They called upon us here, Jamaica, please slow to your slowest possible speed. I'm like, okay, let's slow down. So it took us a while to get there. And then once we got there, the winds were 90 degrees off the runway, gusting to 40 knots, which exceeds the aircraft's limits, of 38 knots. So it was even impossible for us to attempt the approach, needless to say, land. So, of course, we entered a holding pattern. And they said, copy holding instructions. We got the instructions and they said, expect further clearance in 2 hours. I'm like, what? I have never in my life held for 2 hours. So, in those days we had HF, which is radio where we could call or dispatch. And I reached out to dispatch and I'm like, hey, they want us to hold for 2 hours. We do have the fuel to hold, but do you want us to perhaps go somewhere else and just wait it out? Maybe Orlando? And that was actually our alternate. So he said, no, just hold. The weather is moving through and it should pass through fairly quickly. So I said, okay. So after an hour, going around in a circuit, getting dizzy, not literally, but, informing the passengers, keeping them updated. They said, air traffic control said, hey, Air Jamaica, would you like to attempt an approach? Because there's like a lull, these hurricane, they come in waves, so there's a little bit of a lull. And I'm like, sure. So we broke off the holding pattern and we started to go towards, vectoring towards the approach. And just when we were turning towards final approach, they said, Air Jamaica, the winds are gusting again over 40 knots. Can you continue? I said, no, we're unable. So they said, okay, go back to the holding pattern. So we went back, held for another 30 minutes, and they said, okay, fine. Again, there's another lull. It's gusting 38 knots, which is the aircraft's limit for gust for landing.
Wow.
This is pilot demonstrated in initially when they're like building the aircraft, So, but we do train for that in the simulator. We train for the limitations. We put the airplane to its limitations in the
When you
simulator.
use the word simulator, I play soccer simulations and
Oh,
war game simulations. My point is, when I crash, it's okay. I just respawn and start again. You don't have that option, so go
we
on.
don't have that option. So, we're looking at the gas and we're like, well, we have half an hour more in the hole, that would use up our 2 hours, and then we'd have to divert to Orlando, which was our alternate. So because the weather had a lull in it, I'm like, okay, let's attempt this approach. So we came in, wind is gusting 38 knots. I'm landing east, and the wind is from the south, So I'm at a, angle to the runway. So I'm kind of looking through my side mirror instead of through my windshield. And you're getting really hammered with gust and turbulence and stuff like that on the approach. And there was an American Airlines 757 in front of me, and the guy came in and landed. And I'm like, if he can land it, then hey, it's no big deal. I'll be right there behind him. So as I was coming down to about 300 feet and the guy landed, he jumped on the frequency and he said, I would never recommend anybody shoot this approach, severe turbulence below 100 feet. And of course, I'm at approaching 100 feet. The tower said, Air Jamaica, say your intentions. And I'm like going around because there's no way.
So you pull
So
up on the handle and you're gone up.
yes, I add that power and I got it. And I had forewarned my passengers that way they wouldn't be scared as to what was happening. But let me tell you something. You're pitching up, the airplane is pitching down. You're rolling to the left, the airplane is rolling to the right. I'm like, whoa, what is going on here?
Marlene, I'm your best passenger, Because guess what? There's no hollering with me. Me have
Let
two
me
drinking on me and me I say, boy, me have to go, relax and make sure the pilot know what I'm deal with and leave it in the hands of the pilot.
well,
Because
Roger,
all of the balling now help.
let me tell you something. All I saw flash in front of me was the headlines in Jamaica newspaper. Air Jamaica female, because they have to stress that, pilot crash lands in Hurricane Ivan. Everybody going to say, but which stupid female pilot was attempting to land in a hurricane?
Wow.
You know?
You
So
you
that
thought
was,
you thought of the man in school and all females around the world and said, that's not gonna be me.
no, not this time. I'm like, I'm out of Dodge. We took off. We actually diverted to Orlando. We waited out. The weather improved. We got more fuel, got new paperwork, and we actually flew back to Atlanta. It was a long day, but
All
that
right.
was definitely one of the
Give
scary
me give
moments.
me a second one.
Okay, so the second one was Caribbean Airlines this time, flying the 737. And we were heading up to New York with a colleague, my first officer. And we had like 30 minutes of whole fuel, which, it's adequate. We had New York as our alternate, and it's like Kingston, Montego Bay there. If the weather is bad in Kingston, chances are it's going to be bad in Mobile too, but it might be different. So we had New York as our alternate going into New York. And the weather was forecasted to be rain showers in the vicinity, which means that it's going to be okay for our approach and landing. But I looked at the forecast and I saw where the weather was actually forecasted to deteriorate as the evening progressed. And this was night. So we took off from Kingston to Montego Bay and then launched from there up to New York, John F. Kennedy. While en route, we were checking the weather in New York, we were checking the weather in New York, and the weather was actually moving in faster than we could get there. So by the time we got close enough, which was about 30 miles from landing, copy holding instructions from air traffic control. That's never a good thing. It's like, oh my God, because we're not the only ones holding. Everybody's going to be holding. And people are coming from various destinations. So I said to first officer, I said, you know what? We only have 30 minutes of whole fuel. But in Jamaica, we are taught make sure you have your back pocket fuel, that little extra, right? So I decided I'm not going to hold here for 30 minutes. I just want maybe one turn in the holding pattern. And then we're going to divert to New York. We're just going to go. And the reason why I opted to go early is because if I wait till I use up my 30 minutes and then go, everybody else is also going there. So no, it's going to be further delays. So I told him, nope, let's just let them one turn in the hole. So air traffic control said, okay. So they cleared me out of the holding pattern. But instead of turning me west towards New York, they turned me east towards the ocean. I'm like, what is he doing? So we declared minimum fuel, which basically tells air traffic control no undue delay for this aircraft. They're low on gas. Then he turned me north, and I'm like, where is he taking me? I need to go towards New York
So,
now.
so my burn out the little gas where I have in my body out.
Extra what I have, man, and I'm like sweating bricks because I'm using up that extra whole fuel, but I'm also going to be, if he doesn't turn me towards New York quickly, then I'll be using up my reserve fuel, and we can't land on fumes. We have to land with what they call minimum in tanks, right? Which in the 737 was in kilos, 1,800 kilos. When I got on final approach into my alternate airport, which is Newark, the winds were kicking up and heavy thunderstorm, heavy lightning, rain. Oh my God. Now, normally the aircraft can land itself. We can program the aircraft to auto land, but we have limitations with wind conditions, that sort of thing. It can't exceed a certain crosswind and that sort of thing. So, and we have to brief it, which I never got an opportunity to brief the what we call Cat 3 landing. So I said to my first officer, I said, listen, I may have to let this plane auto land because guess what? We do not have fuel to go around. We are using up our reserve fuel. We are at our alternate. We must land. Come hell or high waters, this plane is touching down. So we got in. I kept it on the automation, and when we were at the airport, the runway was very well lit, and so I knew I was over the runway when I disconnected that autopilot and landed that aircraft. So we like, oh my God, thank God we are safe. We exited, and now because we're at an alternate airport, we're like, where are we going? Where do we park? So we have to coordinate with dispatch, which was in Trinidad. So I stopped the aircraft, got my cell phone out, which normally wouldn't use our cell phone in flight, but New York, we spoke to them on the radio. They knew we were diverting, but no, I needed to talk to somebody because we can't get through to anybody as to where we're going to park and we're running out of fuel. So I called New York and I said, can you please call Trinidad and ask the guys to reach out to me? I gave them my number, and the guy called me in a timely manner and wanted to know what precipitated my diversion. So I just calmly said, well, it's precipitation. The weather is bad. But I'm here to tell you that, if you don't get me a gate really fast, I'm going to run out of gas before I actually get to the gate. So he said, okay, we'll work on it. And we got to the gate. Let me tell you, running out of fuel is not a comfortable experience. So those were my two challenges. I'm not hearing you.
Hey, thanks for telling
Sorry.
me that. No, 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 all good. No, those are really nice examples. I always wonder to myself, when you have 250 people and you can tell me what's the maximum amount of people that you have flying with, is there a level of pressure on you having all those lives taken care of? And on top of that, I understand a lot of pilots take a nice swift drink on the quiet. No, not a lot of them, but you hear about one and two take a little rum, and they're humans just like us. They have problems, marital problems, illness. Some of them highly religious, some want meat, they make us. So there's so much stuff going on. How
Yeah.
do you wrap around, hey, I've got 200 people with their families I'm responsible for. This is no joke. This is serious. How do you mentally prepare for stuff like that?
So whether it's one passenger or 228 passengers on a 321, I deal with it the exact same way. And for the most part, it's preparedness. We have our computers, our company computers from home. You can actually pull up the flight plan. You can actually see the entire route, program everything before you actually get on board. Because we use our laptops, as it were. They call them EFBs. But I'm responsible not only for the passengers, but my crew members, plus a multi-million dollar aircraft that the company has handed to me and said, hey, go take this plane safely from point A to point B, you know? So mentally, we prepare ourselves by reviewing everything ahead of time. That way, when you get there, you know where the wind's coming from, you know which runway technically you're going to be using, which direction you're going to be taking off, you know your route. Once you get there, you kind of know what the weather is en route, the weather at your destination, the weather at your alternate, how much fuel you'll be needing. Once you get that paperwork and you start to review everything. If we had any maintenance issues ahead of time, we would have to review the logbook and see what kind of procedures we would have had to do prior to us departing, that sort of thing. So, needless to say, it's very stressful. It's a very stressful job, and the responsibility is huge, and I take that really seriously. And I see passengers tell me all the time that they were scared, and have I ever been scared and stuff. And I remind each passenger that my life is involved too. So whatever decision I make, I have to save my life first before I can save yours. Because if something happens to the crew, then the plane is going down. You see what I'm saying? So I take that very seriously. Maintain a standard of professionalism at all times. you know Once you get where you're going after a stressful flight, and you have the 12 hours between what we call the bottle and the throttle, then if you want to take a drink, I try not to take any alcoholic beverages, especially when I'm away from home. Once I'm home and I'm on my days off, oh yeah, a glass of wine or some rum punch or something. you know when I'm away from home on duty, and we have our normal rest period and stuff like that. But we are randomly checked. That's why some guys get caught, because they've had one or two people remaining the night before. You know what I'm saying? It's responsible, because I know that the weight is heavy on my shoulders. I take every precaution. Um,
Okay.
in fact, Roger, you know that even while driving, if I get a DUI while driving, I lose my pilot's license.
Wow.
Yeah. So whereas we would take chances and we'll drink, a drink or two or so. If I am stopped while driving and I exceed the limit at all for driving, then my pilot's license is revoked. So I'm not gonna risk that. You know what
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
saying?
It's funny. I didn't know. I didn't know. Road. A ground DUI would hurt you in the air.
Absolutely.
Tell me
Absolutely.
this. In the last, you've been flying for over 40 years. What technological impact, or what has happened in technology that has made flying so much safer than it was in the 80s? And on top of that, I'm going back to the question regarding what you actually do. Tell us about the trim, and when do you turn it onto autopilot and relax a little bit? And the reason I ask you that is I drove to Las Vegas the other day, and I had a car that had like self-driving, and it relaxed me so much. So I didn't have to worry about my speed. The car braked for me, and it kept the car in the lane
Really
that I needed to be. And
nice.
you would not believe it took, as far as stress, it took 60% of the stress. And until you've done it, you won't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
But I drove from Dallas to Las Vegas, probably 18 hours.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Wow.
Do you remember the question? Coming on me word.
Yeah. Yeah, man. There's so much involved. Oh my God. So, what was the first question?
What kind of technology has been bust in the last 40 years
Yes.
that's
So
made us
in
safer?
yes. So when I started flying in 1989 with Air Jamaica, as I said, there were three pilots in the cockpit. So as technology evolved, then it went to two pilots. They're talking about zero pilots. I mean, they're building drones now with planes that fly without pilots. I don't think that will perhaps happen in my lifetime in aviation. But technology has improved so tremendously. We have now what is called TCAS, Traffic Alert Collision Avoidance System, which prevents you from colliding with another aircraft on the same altitude in opposite directions. We have also what's called GPWS, Ground Proximity Warning Systems, which tells us, if you're flying towards a mountain, um, it senses that you're going to collide with a mountain, and it tells you terrain, terrain, pull up, pull up. So we have all these technologies, the navigation and the way we conduct our approaches. We have like FLS, SLS. We never had those things um, in my era. We had what we call VOR, where we'd fly from one station to another station. We had NDB, which was really archaic, that is not even in existence these days because everything is satellite and GPS and all those navigations. And in the older aircraft, they had like radial dial um, instruments, whereas now you're basically looking at a map. You can see the route, you can see the waypoints, you can see the aircraft where it's going on the route. So technology has advanced tremendously, tremendously.
So this question I asked about, not when I was telling you about that lady. Tell me, what is
The
taking
trim,
care of the trim, and
okay,
when do you put on the automatic pilot and go to
right.
sleep?
So the so the trim, right? We have rudder trim in some airplanes. We have aileron trim, right? But it's mostly rudder trim, and so the rudder is what controls the direction of the aircraft. And then we have the trimmable horizontal stabilizer, which is for pitch. So we have pitch trim and we have rudder trim. Um, so once we start the engines, hydraulic pressure is applied to the aircraft, um, because the aircraft would be really really heavy if we had to fly it with just your hands. So it's very hydraulically operated, and of course with the Airbuses it's all electrical stuff, computerized stuff like that. So we actually set the trim for takeoff after the engine, either one engine or both engines have started. We set our trim for pitch, and that trim setting is predetermined based on the conditions of the aircraft. So if it's heavy, the runway condition, the runway length, the wind, the obstacles, the temperature,
So,
the
so
altimeter
sorry
setting.
about this. Sorry about this. So, I'm heavy into Formula One. So, when you're talking about trim, are you talking about pieces of the aircraft that, like a flap or something, that moves air differently so that it's prepared for what's upcoming, the
So
environment?
yes, a trim is attached to the flight control surfaces.
Okay.
So like the rudder trim is attached to the rudder,
So, is it a
the
flap?
trimmable horizontal. Yes,
Okay.
some of the aircraft have a separate piece of device that is attached to the rudder. So, and for the trimmable horizontal stabilizer, it's the entire horizontal stabilizer that is moving up and down. Now, in the smaller airplanes, like what you were expressing earlier with this young female, um, the trim is actually moving a tab on the elevator. So in the big jets, the trimmable horizontal stabilizer, the entire thing moves, right? But in the smaller aircraft, we have a trim tab. So basically, what a trim does, it relieves the pilot of the excess load of the aircraft. For example, when you do like a single engine takeoff, you lose the engine on takeoff. One engine is going to be supplying more thrust than the other engine. So in order to maintain directional control, you have to apply the rudder, right? So you have to use rudder force on your foot to keep that airplane flying straight. Now, after a while, you can't hold that pressure for very long because the muscles in your leg is going to start shaking, and it's like, oh my god, this is too heavy. It can get real heavy depending on the weight of the airplane and stuff like that. So we use the rudder trim to relieve the crew of that pressure. So we can trim it to the right or to the left depending on which engine failed, you know. And then once you trim it properly, you can actually relieve your foot of the rudder pedal and then engage the autopilot, and the autopilot will trim it also. So generally speaking, we set the trim after we have started our engines. So the trim is set for takeoff, and we have checklists and stuff that we double check as the speeds for takeoff, the weight, make sure it's in the right trim setting for takeoff. And if it's not, the aircraft tells us, you know.
So is there auto takeoff?
No, we don't
Okay.
yet have auto takeoff, but there is auto land. There's also automatic braking, and we can't auto taxi either. So the captain is usually the pilot taxiing the aircraft. And once we get onto the runway, we take turns as to who is going to do the takeoff, who is going to do the landing. So we usually alternate and say, okay, it's one leg today up to New York. I'll take it. Or would you prefer to take it, and I offer it to the first officer? So
When do you decide when to turn the
the
automatic
autopilot on.
on? Is that
Right.
when you reach the 30,000 feet and the lady them ready to feed everybody and give them the crackers and irritated water? Is that when it happens?
No. You can turn the autopilot on once you get airborne. 5 seconds after liftoff, you can turn the autopilot on.
Okay, I did not know
Um,
that.
yes, usually by 100 feet or 5 seconds after liftoff. And we also have limitations with when to disconnect the autopilot for depending on the type of landing that you're doing. Unless you're doing an auto land where both autopilots are engaged and will actually allow the aircraft to land itself. You know, we have to program it. We have to do a lot of stuff to get it to auto land. But most pilots love flying. So once we get airborne, we'll be flying the aircraft usually to about maybe 3,000, 5,000 feet. Some pilots will take it up to 10,000. Generally, beyond 10, we don't fly it. It gets more sensitive as you fly to the higher altitudes. So the autopilot does a much better job because it's a computer. So it helps to maintain that level of stability because we have to maintain a particular altitude, let's say 35,000 feet, and you can't be hand flying and talking on the radio or doing other things that would distract you. And then you're up at 36,000 feet. And then
Right,
you're
right.
colliding with another aircraft out there. So, generally speaking, once you're airborne, 2,500, 3,000 feet, put the autopilot on.
Hey, Marlene, I have to thank you very, very, very much for humoring me. I've always had lots of questions. I even want to ask you one where this the chemtrails. Is it normal for people to be dumping gasoline when they're playing too heavy?
Um, in the A300 that I flew as a second officer, we had the capability to dump, but we were restricted as to the altitude. We had to be above 5,000 feet. We could not dump fuel over land, so we had to go over the ocean and dump. And we had to calculate our dumping numbers so that we don't dump out everything and land on fumes. Nowadays, the technology, the aircraft that I fly now, the A320s, the 321s, they don't have that capability to dump. So if we took off, let's say, and heading down, let's say a 3 hour flight down somewhere, and we had to turn back, we would be perhaps quite heavily overweight for landing. We have restrictions on our landing weight. So what we do is we enter a holding pattern, depending on the malfunction. If it were something mechanical, we would hold. And I have landed overweight at least maybe 2 or 3 times in my career. And we have different things that you have to inspections that you have to have maintenance do to land overweight. But one of the main factors about landing overweight is busting the tires because we have restrictions with the tire speed, and you're going heavy, you're going faster. So the likelihood and using up a lot of brakes so the brakes can catch fire, that sort of thing.
Okay, cool, cool. Well, once again, Marlene, thank you.
It was an absolute pleasure. Call me anytime. I'll be happy to
Yeah,
talk about
me
aviation.
have only a question.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Thanks, Roger. It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks always.
No worries.